Hey guys, welcome back to Film Feature 43. Today we're talking about everyone's favorite 1970s psychedelic horror film. Some people would say maybe kids film, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So for the last couple weeks, I have been discussing a lot of superhero content about the MCU and the DCEU. So today I figured we'd hop back on the Wonka train for at least one more stop to kind of do like a hero swap tier list of what would happen if we took characters from different fantasy films, kid characters in specific, and dropped them into the world of Willy Wonka, gave them a golden ticket. How would they fare against the other kids? Where would they land on the list of kids possibly winning the factory? Like I said, the setting is the 1971 Gene Wilder Willy Wonka, not the 2005 Johnny Depp Willy Wonka. But the characters are going to be from anywhere and everywhere. But there are a few ground rules that I want to put forward of how I chose the kids for this tier list. First, the movie specifically has to be about children. It's kind of loosey-goosey with some of these, but for this, I kind of disqualified kids from Bedtime Story or Night at the Museum, where Adam Sandler and Ben Stiller are the main characters, and the kids just happen to be there, kind of like plot points. So those kids will not be on this list. The next kind of criteria that I used is the kids have to come from some sort of fantasy or magical film to make it comparable to the kids in the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So there won't be any Sandlot or Mighty Ducks or Stand By Me or Journey to the Center of the Earth. No Goonies, Holes, Spy Kids, or The Explorers. And no Karate Kid, even though we all know that Daniel LaRusso runs an amazing car dealership enterprise. He's not eligible to win the factory and lead it to success. That also eliminates Kevin McAllister from Home Alone, even though some of you might think that his knowledge of booby traps might help him win Willy Wonka's factory. He's not up for consideration. Also, that unfortunately eliminates kids from the Losers Club and the Monster Squad, because that's more of like science fiction, supernatural type films instead of fantasy, so I didn't consider them for the list. Another criteria is these have to be regular kids. They can't have superpowers to help them win the contest. So no Shark Boy and Lava Girl, no Dash and Violet from The Incredibles, no kids from Sky High, even though they're probably too old anyway, and no Matilda. Also, unfortunately, that eliminates Harry Potter, and I know a lot of you probably are fans of Harry Potter, but he's not going to be the one to win this contest based on my criteria. And my last criteria that I had was the kids had to be in a film, even though it's fantasy or not, that I wanted to watch or at least rewatch, or I have seen. So that unfortunately eliminated the kids from The Cat in the Hat with Mike Myers and the kids from Polar Express. So with all that out of the way, let's get started with both Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory films. If you've seen my videos before, you kind of know where the first film lays out. The first film, all of the kids, I think, land on the F tier, except for Violet and Charlie Bucket. I think that they are on the A and B tier respectively, and that's where I'm going to put them. As for the kids in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory with Johnny Depp, I think they all squarely land in the F tier, including Violet Beauregarde, because she has none of the redeeming qualities that Violet in the 1970s had. But, plot twist, I actually think that Charlie Bucket is better than the original Charlie Bucket. I think he has all the redeeming qualities of Charlie, but also seems a little bit more emotionally stable. He doesn't seem to get as emotional. Maybe that's because he didn't really go through a trial like Charlie did in the original, but I feel like Charlie from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory actually ends up on the S tier of my list, just because I think he handles himself a little bit better, and to me is just a more likable kid than the original Charlie, and I think he could do a pretty good job. We see him at the end of that film actually throwing out ideas to Willy Wonka.
How do you feel about little raspberry kites?
With licorice instead of string.
The next character that I want to talk about is Alice from Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass, the live-action films. She clearly has an active imagination, saying that she tries to think of
6 impossible things.
before breakfast every single morning. She took over her father's business and was a literal captain of a ship, so clearly she has some leadership potential. She's determined to save the people of Wonderland, and she has experience with working with people who are a little different, kind of like the Oompa Loompas in Underland. And the shrinking and growing confections that she experiences is something that seems right up Willy Wonka's alley. She gets bonus points for dealing with a different, strange Johnny Depp character that wasn't the Willy Wonka from the Charlie and Chocolate Factory, but we're talking about the 1970s Willy Wonka, so that's not going to win her the prize. I think what ultimately hurts Alice, she's a little too old, and just like the Jedis, once you reach a certain age, you're not able to be trained by Willy Wonka anymore, so he doesn't want you. He wants mainly kids. So for that reason, all of her pluses kind of get negated by that, so I'll put her in the middle of the range at a C tier. Speaking of kids getting transferred through furniture into this magical world, the next group of kids on my list are the kids from Chronicles of Narnia, and right off the bat, Susan and Peter, I think, fall in the D tier. They just tend to have a general lack of imagination, and they happen to be a little too old. I feel like, because in the later films, they can't enter Narnia because they're too old, so I feel like if you can't enter Narnia because of your age, you can't run Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory. Lucy, on the other hand, seems to have a really active imagination. She believes in Wonderland right away. She's much like Charlie from the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, but she is very easily tricked by James McAvoy in the beginning of the film, and she does have kind of a redeeming quality in dealing with people who are different than her, but she doesn't have that much leadership. She tends to be a follower, so I think that lands her in the C tier. And it should be no surprise that Edmund falls squarely in the F tier. He's selfish, he sells out his family for, well, candy, so maybe that puts him in the E tier. No, never mind, I'm just kidding. That was Turkish Delight. I don't think that really qualifies as candy. I apologize if you like it. But I think it's undeniable that he goes with the rest of the Wonka kids on the F tier. The next person I want to look at on the list is Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. This is the original Wizard of Oz with Judy Garland. I think she falls in the same area with the older kids from Chronicles of Narnia, which she's a little too old, which I said the same thing about Alice from Alice in Wonderland. But Dorothy really tends to lack the imagination that Alice has. Her brain creates this huge magical world that seems very imaginative from the outset, but then as you dig a little bit deeper, she's just really pulling from things in her own life, and it kind of lacks that creativity that we see from Alice and Alice in Wonderland. She's constantly in peril. She has to be saved by somebody else. And the one time she actually does defeat the bad guy, it's completely by accident. She has to be saved. She accidentally splashes water on the witch, and the witch ends up dying. There's no really creativity or self-promotion there to give credence to the fact that she would be a good leader and lead the Chocolate Factory into the future. But she does expose the wizard as just being a man behind the curtain. Oh no, wait, she doesn't do that either. Toto does that. So, I mean, she really doesn't do anything for herself in this film, at least not on purpose. So, for that reason, I think she lands squarely in the E tier. The next kid on the list is where my rules get bent a little bit. It's Charlie from the Santa Claus. He's not really the main character, but I think he's a main enough character to justify him having some spot on this list. I think in the first film, he lands squarely in the A tier, but by the time the second and third film roll around, he slides down to the E tier. In the first film, he does great with people who are different than him when he's dealing with the elves. He wants to take over the family business, even though it seems impossible, kind of like Charlie taking over for Willy Wonka. And speaking of impossible, no matter what anybody tells him, even his dad who was with him at Santa's workshop, he still believes it was real.
Have you ever seen a reindeer fly?
Yes.
Well, I haven't.
You ever seen $1 million?
No.
Just because you haven't seen it Doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
And that imagination, I think, would bode well for him taking over for Willy Wonka once Willy Wonka retires. He's also innovative. He creates new technology for his father, so his father doesn't get burned up in fireplaces and things like that. So he has that innovative brain that would lend him very well to being the apprentice to Willy Wonka. But by the time that Santa Claus 2 rolls around, he's doing anything he can to act out. He's just really one
Bad egg.
and he might be too old by this point anyway, so that's why he lands on the list, sliding down a little bit further by the time 2 and 3 roll around. The next person on my list is Coraline Jones from the movie Coraline. She's very imaginative and very innovative whenever she's taking on the beldam, but she is manipulated due to her discontentment, which would really hurt her in the quest to being the next Willy Wonka. Both of her parents seem to ignore her and be disinterested in her, which might take her moral compass and throw it off whack, leading to a deal with Slugworth. Maybe not, but I just feel like she could be tricked into doing something like that because of her being tricked by the beldam to try to stay in the other world. And she doesn't really have a great track record with treating people who are different than her kindly, especially in the case of Wybie, where he's a little bit different and she mocks him for being different. So she has some pluses, but I would say more negatives. So I think she would land on the D tier of this list. The next kids on the list are the kids from Mary Poppins and Mary Poppins Returns. So Jane and Michael Banks from the original Mary Poppins, I think, have good imaginations. They spend a lot of time with a magical authority figure who is sort of condescending and firm and really manipulative in the way they get people to do what they want. So that might give them a leg up on dealing with Willy Wonka.
First of all, I would like to make one thing quite clear.
Yes.
I never explain anything.
The kids do learn respect and actually how to float in the air during the tea party scene, so that might help them in creating the fizzy lifting drink. But we do see them lose their imaginative spark by the time Mary Poppins Returns. Michael becomes just like his father, and also they actually might be a little bit too young to run the factory, so I think that lands them on the D tier of this list. I also forgot to mention about how passive they are in their story. They kind of just go with the flow with whatever Mary Poppins or their father wants them to do. So yeah, I think that adds to the fact of why they would be on the D tier. So for John, Annabelle, and Georgie Banks in Mary Poppins Returns, all the good stuff that I said about their father and aunt applies here as well, except they are far less passive in their own story. They kind of take a front seat role in helping Mary Poppins help their father than their parents did. They also believe that
everything is possible, even the impossible.
Which really helps when you're dealing with Willy Wonka and his crazy factory, but they also might be a little too young to take on this role yet, so I think that puts them in the C tier. The next movie we're talking about is
Neverending Story.
with Atreyu and Bastian. Atreyu takes on a leadership role when he's trying to save Fantasia, and he also was actually put through a trial already when he came to the Swamp of Sadness, which he passed with a little bit of help, even though he lost his horse in the process. He chose to help those who were different than him in the Land of Fantasia, but he kind of tends to be a little bit more on the stubborn side, and his skill set really doesn't help him run a multinational candy corporation, so I think he lands on the C tier. Bastian also lands on the C tier. He has an amazing imagination, bringing this whole world to life in his head, but he is very hesitant to help save it to begin with, so that almost gets Fantasia wiped completely off the map. So for that reason, I think that lands him in the C tier. And the final kids I'm going to talk about on this list are the Baudelaires from Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. I'm talking about the Baudelaires from the movie, not the TV series. And that might be a little bit cheating, but I think that all three of them together would be able to run the factory more successfully than probably anybody else on this list. That they belong on the S tier, and the reason why I think that, and the reason why I left them for the end, is because I think that they embody all the characteristics that Willy Wonka is actually looking for in children to help to carry on his legacy. They actually seem like they were made specifically for the task of running a candy factory. Their skill set, all three of them, align specifically with what it would take to run a factory from a logistical standpoint. The youngest one, Sonny's skill is literally biting things, which kind of falls in line with running a candy factory. And with Violet's ingenuity and Klaus's book smarts, any problem that would come up in running the factory would be literally not a problem for the Baudelaire children. Willy Wonka's weirder tendencies would pale in comparison to the narcissism that they had to deal with Count Olaf.
Hello, hello, hello. I am your beloved Count Olaf.
And the one thing that I think puts them above most of the people on this list is they learn from their caretakers. If Willy Wonka would take them in and teach them, they would learn the things that he wanted them to learn. They learned about snakes and safety from the caretakers that actually cared about them in the movie. So that kind of negates the age problem with Violet being older. That doesn't really matter because the reason Wonka wants a younger person is because he can mold them. So the Baudelaires wanting to learn and even desiring to learn and being able to be molded would actually help them win the contest. They're very humble, and if you don't like that, then just average their ages together and you get somewhere in the middle that would be the perfect age for Willy Wonka. But that's my list. Let me know if you agree with the list, disagree with the list. If, like I said, if you have somebody you think should be on this list, let me know, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks.